Hello, dear friends. Juan Enrique greeting you once again on this beautiful day. Just trying to share a message with you about how to handle the most difficult situations in our life. How to get our mind around it, how to get our heart around it. Most of all, how to find spirit in all of it. And I know that all of us have been challenged lately with the difficulties that we face. And so this message is entitled Truth, Tears, Anger, and Grace. And before we get started, just want to remind you, if you like this channel, the content, please push the like button. We really appreciate that. I've also put up the PayPal donation button there. If you feel inspired, would love to receive a donation. Keeps the channel going and keeps me inspired. So let me begin with a quote from the Bible. Jesus is speaking. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give unto you. Not as the world gives do I give. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. And I bring that to mind because, frankly, my heart has been troubled, and I've been feeling fear. It's been very difficult dealing with the situations that we have. The news, seems like the war in Ukraine seems to be escalating. Other troubled places, flooding in Pakistan, Nicaragua's got a situation going right now. Here in the United States, we have raging inflation. The COVID situation still doesn't let go. Supply chain issues, global warming, for God's sakes. Sense of separation here in the United States of the political parties, where it seems like we can't seem to have constructive dialogue between opposing parties. Not to mention, of course, the terrible shootings, Uvalde, Buffalo, only the latest. And I say all this not to be political, but to express a feeling that it's been very hard for me to allow myself to feel all of these things, to feel connected with the world that seems to be hurting. Because if I open my heart to it, it seems like it's too much to hold. And so I'm looking for the spiritual solution, which is what we do. And frankly, what happens within me is that I tend to shut down. Rather than go into all that grief and the fear and feel all of it, I tend to shut down. I don't want to shut down. I want to be proactively engaged with what's happening in the world and, of course, in my life. And so I'll just remind you something that Paul, the Apostle Paul in the Bible says. He says, to his congregation, right? Go ahead and grieve. But don't grieve as those without hope. And here Paul is telling us two things that are very important for us today. Number one, he's telling us, go ahead and feel your feelings. Go ahead and feel the sadness, feel the fear, feel the grief. Go ahead and grieve. If you're sad, go ahead and be sad. That's the first thing. The second thing is, watch out that you not grieve without hope, right? So go ahead and grieve, but in the back of your mind, we always have to remember that the light is always there. That no matter how dark it is, that the light is always present. This is a very important example for us today, because what I tend to do if I'm going to allow myself to grieve is I kind of stay in grief, right? Stay in the mourning, stay in the sadness. And if I would remember what the Apostle Paul is reminding us, to keep that hope alive, it leaves that flicker of light open so that I can always remember to go there. You might remember the story of John the Baptist in the Bible. John the Baptist was beheaded, sort of a difficult situation for him, obviously. And the disciples of Jesus came and picked up the body and went and buried John the Baptist. And then after they buried him, they continued mourning him. And after a while, they went and told Jesus what had happened, how John the Baptist had been beheaded. But this is an important little story because it tells us that the apostles did what they needed to do, buried the body, and then took a time to really feel those feelings, feel the grief. And then they went and told Jesus, symbolically going to the light, going to God, going to Spirit. This is an important thing for us because oftentimes we stay seated at the burial site, grieving, sadness, forgetting that we're also called to come to the light. And so this is why I want to share with you today the scripture about Lazarus, the resurrection of Lazarus. It's a well-known story. I'll just read it for you, just to remind you of what it says. This comes from John 11:20 through 53, although I've taken out some sections that I feel I didn't need for the message today. And it says, when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." And Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." And Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." And Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never lie. Do you believe this?" he says. And she said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." And when Mary came out where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come see." And Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" He cried out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. And Jesus said to him, "Unbind him and let him go." This is an important story for us because it's a story that helps us understand how we can deal with the most difficult situations in our own life. It is a story that obviously Jesus is facing something very difficult in his own life, the life of his friend Lazarus, dealing with the situations with Martha and Mary and the other Jews that were there. And in this story, Jesus really teaches us 4 things which we'll cover. And this is truth and tears, anger and grace. Truth that he offers to Martha, tears that he shares with Mary, anger at the tomb, and grace for everyone. So I'm going to cover these 4 things, but I'm not going to cover it in the same order. I'm going to shift the order a little bit to make the message flow a little better for our purposes here today. And we'll start with tears. So this is the second sister, Mary, comes out to meet Jesus, and she kneels at his feet and is crying. Says, "Why, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And, Jesus doesn't have an answer for her. Did you get that? That he doesn't answer her directly. The only thing he can say is, "Where have you laid him?" And so the tears of Jesus here are very surprising, startling almost, okay? Why are they startling? Well, because Jesus comes into the situation with 2 things that we have, but we oftentimes forget to use, okay? So Jesus comes in understanding the purpose of this situation. He knows what's going to happen. He knows, there's a storyline here, and he understands the purpose of it. He's very clear on that. That's the first thing. The second thing is that he realizes that he has the power to do something about it. Not only purpose, but power to do something about it. He knows he's going to resurrect Lazarus in just a few minutes. And this is why I say that it's startling that he would cry. Why would he weep? It's surprising because what it's going to take from him, to leave Mary, go to the tomb, and resurrect Lazarus, figure 10, 15 minutes tops, right? And he's going to do this in short order, and yet he weeps. And this is why I say it's surprising, because just put yourself in Jesus' shoes. If you knew that you were going to come into this situation and 10 minutes later Lazarus was going to be resurrected and everybody was going to be celebrating that, and, would you cry? Would you weep? Well, the important thing about this is that God will meet us wherever we happen to be, at the moment we are, right? Jesus joins with Mary because Mary needed somebody to acknowledge her grief, her sadness, to be with her, connected with her in that mourning, in that sadness, right? And one might say, well, what, for 10 minutes? Yes. God will join with you, even if it's for 10 minutes, to be with you in the sadness. It's a very important lesson for us. And another important lesson in there is that, we need to remember that we need to feel our feelings, that it's perfectly fine to go ahead and cry. Jesus demonstrated that it's perfectly fine to feel your feelings and to express them, to feel the grief, feel the sadness, and allow the tears to come. He's giving us permission. Now, we understand that Jesus is a very emotionally mature person, and yet he gives himself 10 minutes to cry. Very important lesson for us. We need to be willing to let the world in with its pain, with its terror, with its grief, with its mourning. We need to open our hearts to it, not be scared away by it. And if it brings about tears for us, well, God bless us, let's cry. Even if it's for 10 minutes. We need to have those those emotions, or energy and motion, as I like to say, moving through us. So this is something that Jesus does that's very right. He shares tears with Mary because it's exactly what is needed at the moment. Well, let's go on to anger. Did you notice that the scripture there says that Jesus was deeply moved, right? He was deeply moved. I understand that some of the translations of the Bible, particularly the Greek ones, interpret that deeply moved as deeply angry. But not only anger, like raging, right? Just very angry. Now, let's just think about, what is he angry about? What is the cause of the anger? What is he angry at? Well, this is an important moment because, he understands the purpose, like we said, right? But we need to understand why he's angry. Well, if you think about any of the situations that you have in your life that is difficult. For example, we have this school shooting comes up in Uvalde. You hear the news again, another mass shooter, right? How many kids and adults were killed, right? And you feel it in your heart, and you may actually weep for the sadness of the death of those children and the other people. And then what happens? After a while, you begin to think about it, and maybe you get angry too. Or maybe you just get quiet. Maybe you remain in sadness. But there's a movement of that emotion from grief and just sadness to something. Maybe you want to do something. Maybe a storyline comes up in your mind about the purpose of it all. And here Jesus demonstrates something that's very important for us, because he's teaching us what to do with our anger, right? Jesus demonstrated anger. It can be a different emotion for you, but as the grief matures, right, you're going to have some kind of reaction to it. We need to know how to do it. And what happens is we come up with a storyline. And the storyline that we tend to come up with is not one that Jesus teaches us, but I'd like to point it out because we need to be aware of the storylines that we tell ourselves. We kind of try to put the difficult situation into a framework, into a story that somehow makes sense for us. And the two storylines that you hear more often than not when something very difficult happens is There's something wrong with those people, right? Or there's something wrong with God. We're looking to blame something. We're looking to see somebody as a bad person. We try to demonize the other people. Or maybe we blame it on God. And God, where are you? What's going on? Here we are. You seem to be absent, so we blame it on God, or we blame it on other people. Recognizing this storyline is very important, because the truth is we have the power to change the storyline. So let's see, what was the storyline that Jesus was holding while he was going through the situation? Did you notice that Jesus did not blame any of the people there? He didn't blame Lazarus. He didn't blame Martha. He didn't blame Mary. Jesus was angry, but he wasn't angry at any of the people. He wasn't saying those are bad people, right? He also wasn't blaming God. Did you notice that? No blame to God. What Jesus was angry about is what we could call the dimming of the light, right? Everybody around him was sad. Lazarus is dead. Normal, natural situation. But he knows that there's going to be a resurrection in just a few moments. And I think he was saddened by the lack of awareness or consciousness that was present there, that allowed them to accept the death of the friend. Let's call it the dimming of the light. And when you witness or hear about or see these difficult situations in the world, a war, a mass shooting, a pandemic, lack of supply chain issues, etc., etc., there's always going to be a human consciousness expressed in those things. And what we oftentimes see in difficult situations is that the consciousness was not fully expressed. The faith was not as strong. And so the light that could be so bright was actually dimmed. It's not as bright. It got a little darker, the consciousness that we hold. And so there is a dimming of the light. And we can get angry about that. We can get angry because the possibility of light is there, and yet the light is being dimmed. See, it's okay to get angry about that, because that anger will motivate us into action, will motivate us into doing what we're called to do, which is, of course, to bring the light in as light bearers. And this is exactly what he does with Martha in sharing truth, right? So we've covered now the tears, we've covered the anger, and you see a process beginning to evolve here. In the tears, we're willing to feel the feelings exactly where we may be. If it's sadness, if it's grief, whatever it is, fear, just go ahead and feel it. And as you begin to think about it, mature in that, you may begin to tell yourself a story about why that is. Avoid the stories of blaming people or blaming God, and come into the realization that this is simply a dimming of the light. It's okay to get angry about that. It's okay to be fearful about that. But we know we have a context now, because we're going to bring some truth into the situation that's going to help us lift it up. We're going to bring light into the situation. So Martha comes to Jesus and says, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died." And Jesus, did you catch the reply that he had to her? He says, "He will rise again." And Martha offers kind of a platitude. "Oh, yeah, I know. He's going to rise at the end of the day, end days, he'll rise again." But then Jesus comes back to her very strong. He says, "I am the resurrection and the life." Very strong. Boom. I am the resurrection and the life. Then he drops another truth bomb on her and he says, "Do you believe this?" Right? And Martha says, yeah, I believe it. God is with you. You're God. God will do anything you ask of him. But that's not Jesus' point. Because Martha's saying there's going to be a resurrection at the end time, some future time. But Jesus is saying, no, wait a minute. I am the resurrection, and the life. Do you believe this? Because if you do, death is not real. Because if you do, the darkness is not real. Okay? In making that statement, Jesus is powerfully declaring a truth that all of us can utilize in our own life to allow the light, to allow the truth to come in and to set us free, to transform the situation from what had been to what can be. Jesus is not promising us a future glory, a future kingdom. He's inviting us in the moment to effect a transformation of consciousness, an evolution of consciousness, so that we can bring light into the situation. He's offering us, as he says, a new heaven and a new earth, not at some future time, but right now. Right now. Right here, right now, in the midst of the situation that we have. I have a recurring nightmare that happens every once in a while. Maybe once or twice a year. I had it recently, that's why I bring it forth here. And in this nightmare, I am sleeping and some people are breaking into our apartment with the intention of doing harm to my family and me. And when I have this nightmare, I wake up startled, sweating, screaming sometimes, right? But recently I've had that nightmare and I have not had such a bad experience as I woke up. Because I came to realize that there was a moment after I woke up in which I come to realize, hey, it was just a dream. And that's kind of a relief, a happiness, a freedom. I'd been just a moment ago in the grips of terrible fear and anxiety. And now I've woken up and all of that was not real. It was just a dream, a nightmare. And Jesus is talking to us in the same way in this story. He's telling us, if you wake up to the light that you are, to the light that is here present all the time, you too can make that situation, you can transform it so that the power of the fear, the grief, the sadness does not overwhelm you, but rather you come to find the opportunity for grace, for light, for truth in the situation. So here we have a process that Jesus has taught us in the gravesite of Lazarus. He's allowing us to feel our feelings deeply, right? He's reminding us that then we'll have a storyline. And he's warning us not to fall into the storyline of blaming people, demonizing them, making them the bad people, which is what I tend to do a lot. When I, see the Supreme Court making it easier for us to have guns just in the wake of a school shooting, I get angry. To me, it's the dimming of the light. I don't want to blame the court judges. Don't want to demonize them. I want to know that the consciousness did not quite express as fully as it could have. And so it is my job to bring light into that. Of course, what I need to do is bring light into my own heart, my own emotions, my own mind first, and then I'll be guided into right action to do it however I may be guided to do it in the world. But first I need to quell, I need to silence the demonizing, right? The blaming. I need to understand that the purpose is there for me to bring light into it, truth into it. And so I'm just remembering that during 9/11, when the World Trade Towers fell here in New York, there was a speaker in the United Nations from Croatia, and he got up and said the following. I think it's very important for us today. He said, "Enormous poison comes into the world and my life when I forget this. Problems happen when I exclude my enemy from the community of humans, and when I exclude myself from the community of sinners. When I forget that my enemy is not a subhuman monster, but a human being. And when I forget that I am not the perfect good, but also a flawed person. So remembering that, right, that we're part of the whole evolution of consciousness. And every single situation, every single person is there to help us remember the light, to bring light into it. And that's the purpose of this story with Lazarus. Of course, we've covered tears, anger, and truth, but let's not forget grace. Because did you notice how Jesus reacted differently to Mary and to Martha? Right? Mary came, both sisters came, and they said the same words. And they're sisters of Lazarus, so it's the same brother has died. They're going through the same incident, the same situation. They have the same words for Jesus, but Jesus deals with one and the other in very different ways. With Martha, like we said, he takes that time to weep with her, to cry with her, right? And with Martha, he shares the truth. Very difficult truth for her at the moment, perhaps. I am the resurrection and the life. Boom, do you believe this? But it was exactly what each of them needed. And you see, that's grace, dear friends. God is always going to give us exactly what we need. If we need to feel the comfort of God's presence in our own grief, in our own mourning, in our own weeping, that's what God will offer us. And eventually, if we need to remember the truth, God is going to offer that as well. And so this is why it's so important that Jesus says, peace I leave with you. My peace I give unto you. Not as the world gives do I give. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let it be afraid. Dear friends, what we can do when we're faced with a difficult situation is come in just like Jesus did into a very difficult situation with those two things. Number one, knowing the reason why it happened, the purpose. And again, we can summarize all of these difficult situations as the dimming of the light, right? The lack of high consciousness, however it may express. And remember also that we have the power. We have the power to do something about it, to provoke a transformation within us, to be able to behold light in the darkness, because we know that the light will always dispel the darkness, that the darkness has no power of its own. The light will always dispel the darkness, provoke that transformation within us, and allow it to express within us, and then guided to do it somehow in the world. When I'm faced with a difficult situation and I put that context, that storyline that I just mentioned, I breathe in God's love. I breathe in God's love. And when I exhale the fear, the grief, the sadness, the negativity, the lack of consciousness, the dimming of the light. Breathe in God's love. Breathe out the negativity. And with each breath then, I'm cleansing myself. I'm bringing more love in. I'm releasing more of the negativity. And I do that as long as I need to do it, so that I can be a standing presence of the truth of God. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? Well, we believe it because we can effect that transformation in our life. So once again, dear friends, peace I leave with you. Peace I give unto you. Not as the world gives do I give. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. I am the resurrection and the life. Juan Enrique reminding you, life is consciousness, and consciousness is life.